Hey everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to break down not only beginner tips, but tips that are actually the fundamental basics to achieving a higher rank in Marvel Rivals. That legit means that we're going to be pretty advanced at some of these discussions that I'm going to be drawing on screen and explaining how some of it works. Really, you are the strategist of your team. This means you can handle all scenarios and formulate a strong strategy for your team to win. You don't just heal. You are literally the backbone of the team. Now, I know some of these tips may feel like, well, duh, but I really felt like for a top 10 tips, we really had to cover the essentials. Remember, everything is timestamped, and let us begin. Tip number 1, know your enemy. What ultimates should you counter and who counters you? The minute somebody locks in their character and you see them in the match, you need to know who to look out for. That means who you should actually utilize your ultimate, well, your healer ultimate, to counter an enemy ultimate. For example, if you are playing Invisible Woman, you benefit less from ulting against Psylocke's ultimate because you could just go invisible and heal from a distance. Now, of course, remember you do need to stack and cannot leave somebody alone in that ultimate, which is why it's important to coordinate. You should always be keeping out and knowing when her ultimate is coming off cooldown. You have that in-game sense. If your teammates' ultimates are starting to come up, you can already guess that the enemy's ultimates are right around the corner. Example 2, Cloak and Dagger. So when you ultimate, you need to beware whenever there's a Magneto or perhaps an Iron Man, somebody who's got insane burst. You just need to be aware, what is the burst damage, and can I get instantly deleted, and can I be thrown off the table? You can freely ultimate whenever you want, but having that awareness and how you're going to position is very important, because trust me, if they wipe you out, then it's like you never really ultimate at all. Example 3. Let's discuss Storm versus Invisible Woman. Now, prior in the patch, you didn't have Human Torch to worry about, so pretty much you can throw down Invisible Woman's ultimate and counter Storm. Now currently, if both of her ultimates are up, Storm and Human Torch can burst you down efficiently. Now, you could use technically Invisible Woman's ultimate to help out your teammates, such as, let's say, Punisher. Punisher can be invisible inside the ultimate and can't get, instantly deleted. But you should also be aware if there is a Magneto or an Iron Man that even though you're in that circle, they're going to ultimate you down. Especially against a Moon Knight. That can be pretty rough as well, considering they can pretty much use the same exact circle and burst everyone out of your ultimate. So having that awareness is very important when this is okay, this is not okay, this is okay, and keeping in mind those synergy, which kind of leads us, I guess you can call this a tip 1.5, if you will. Let's say an ultimate has great synergy with Bucky and Punisher. Rocket could essentially throw down his ultimate, be right next to Punisher, and then say right after, don't worry, I'm going to throw you unlimited ammo just to assist. And then if he gets eliminated, guess what? He could have a BRB there. That is fantastic synergy to keep up consistent damage. Now, the next one that is really important in terms of synergy is to counter dive, which would be Namor and Luna. It's a deadly combo having the extra squid, especially with the slow. It's really, really effective having 3 different squids to worry about. Invisible Woman and Reed, if nobody wants to off-tank, for example. Let's say you only have 1 tank, but Reed can definitely be pretty powerful with Invisible Woman. Now, another one that is highly underutilized is Cloak and Dagger and Moon Knight. So there's some that may not be as effective, which is why I'm mentioning it here, or underutilized, but still important to keep an eye on. So that leads us to our next tip of keeping an eye on things. When coordination, even when you solo queue, you have to know your job. One of the biggest ones is don't stack ultimates. Even a simple typing, I'm going to ultimate first, or you ultimate for this, just say what you plan on countering can go a really long way. Or just being very aware, keeping an eye on your ultimate. If you just flat out refuse to talk, keeping an eye on your own meter and saying, okay, well, it looks like I'm going to come up first here on the ultimate. I'm going to counter as soon as I get it because I know they're going to ultimate. That would be extreme game sense, but it's hard to pull off. Coordinate who is pushing or standing back and who's healing who. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say Invisible Woman is on the tanks. Invisible Woman could technically use her shield to get some of the flyers, right? We talk about flyers, Iron Man, Storm, Human Torch, anybody who's flying around. Luna is going to be a lot more effective on getting them if they're really far away, because Invisible Woman unfortunately does have a distance, which is kind of a limitation. Rocket also has the effect where it slows, but also has great sustained heals per second, where other healers might have better bursts. So once that sustained HPS is kind of gone, Rocket may not be as useful. So keep in mind who you're pairing with. So let's say Rocket with a Mantis may not be as effective because it's both strong healing over time. But again, it depends on how your team is synergized, and doesn't mean necessarily anything is bad, but just being aware of what you're prepping for, right? Prep work is everything. It feels like you're like the Batman of strategists. Like if Batman was a strategist, he could be a healer, even though naturally he'd be more like Moon Knight. Just throwing that out there, a little funny comparison. Now, tip number 3. Positioning, positioning, positioning. As a strategist, I cannot stress this enough. Let's give an example. When you get dived by a Black Panther and run towards your team, or towards positive objective areas, play near your team and play smart not to get isolated. I think some of the biggest mistakes strategists make is that they're so far away from the team, they're not even in range of their other healer, they're not coordinating who they're going to heal, they're just standing blatantly out in the open. Let's say perhaps they're overextended, which is going to be another tip. Maybe they're too far behind and they can't even see half of the team just to even heal them, or they're so pushed forward that they're pretty much only seeing one person. All of that really matters. And keep in mind, if you're pushed forward and you're the designated, let's say, tank healer, I can understand that, and you have somebody else doing the job, but that has to be coordinated. You can't just make wild assumptions unless you get really lucky and everyone just kind of synergizes. So that kind of goes with tip number 4, when not to push versus when to push. You can also use your ultimate to put a lot of pressure. Let's say, for example, you can't get on the point, you need to get on top of it. You can throw your ultimate, you can Luna ult forward and say, okay, now we're going to play aggressive. Because sometimes people don't really find that opening until you have pretty much unlimited healing and you can just barrel right through. Ideally, yes, you want to save your ultimates to counter abilities, but also remember, this is all about the objective. If you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for a pick and nothing's happening, you have to take space. Every second really matters, and if you've gone 30 seconds not getting on that point, at some point, no pun intended, you have to take that space. So you kind of have to make that call, unfortunately, if you're just at an ultimate standstill and you're just not moving forward. This is where you coordinate with your team, and the tanks say, I have Eye of Agamotto. Let's say Doctor Strange, push forward. And then afterwards, after you get a few eliminations, hold the healer ultimate. Or maybe Doctor Strange can't get in because he's going to get eliminated, but he needs the healer ult to push him forward to knock everyone out. That's a strategy. Is it perfect? No. But does it work in that moment? Yes, especially if Doctor Strange cannot get through and fly in there in time, and that can really help. Just like when we mentioned with, let's say, the Punisher ultimate, which kind of comes full circle. You'll notice some of these tips kind of overlap a little bit. Let's say, for example, Punisher is extremely scared because if he peeks out, the damage is really good from the enemy team. Drop that healer ultimate. He's invisible now. Great synergy. That's very important. So now, tip number 5, we're going to discuss use all of your abilities, okay? Every single one. We're going to start with Invisible Woman, but this is the best visual representation that I can give of how healers need to approach both healing and DPSing. Usually everyone always heals, and you got a one-track mind in terms of healing. Or they switch gears and say they need to just DPS. The best visual that I can give, especially with Invisible Woman, is that you're not just healing and DPSing, but you're doing both at the same time, especially when you're fighting a line. Now let's talk about the downside of this though. If you're just focusing one line, you're going to miss people on your left. This elimination happened here, and maybe one of your teammates over here did well and knocked one. But you need to make sure that you're blending this together, and maybe you're putting a shield there, and you're keeping focus forward, right? This is the example that I'm giving in terms of making sure you're DPSing down a flyer. You can do the same logic, especially if you're looking behind with like Luna or something, but of course it doesn't have the same effect as Invisible Woman, but at least you're able to still just target switch and heal when needed. Having that full visual, if you back up even further, of how everyone is taking damage is very, very important, so you know when to switch. Everyone's healthy, can switch just to little DPS, and then switch right back. Right? Now, the other tip that I have for healers when it comes to DPSing is we're going to use Cloak and Dagger for this one, and then switch back to Invisible Woman. Because Mantis is also fantastic, but I mean, again, it's just an example, right? If everyone is topped off and you're using every single one of your abilities, right? Let's say you're switching to DPS and then you get them topped off, but you use your ability there to top them off, and then you switch, and then you blind afterwards. You blind the opponent, then you decide to switch back, and you heal back up. And then you put a little AoE, and of course if you miss it, that's fine. Maybe you stand on top of it, you switch, and then you make sure you use your DPS to get them down, switch back, heal up. And if you use your ability at that point too, boom, give them a little bit of a boost, switch, blind the opponent, switch back, and then heal back up again. You see what I'm doing is that you're maximizing every single one of your abilities, right? The key is that you're using everything on CD, and that's why I use Cloak and Dagger, because you're switching between forms. The same thing with Invincible Woman. If you're here healing everybody up, you're putting a shield up, you throw a vortex, and then you pull somebody in, and then you switch back. And then if you happen to spend a lot of time or you're not using that ability, that is wasted damage. Let's say we pull back our shield, it recharges, right? And guess what? You can pull somebody in. And that's what you're trying to aim for, is that you're trying to use that moment to pull somebody in and maximize on that. That's the goal and that's the key. So that wraps up this section, and we're going to go into the next section to pretty much continue helping with the top 10 tips to improve as a strategist. Now, tip number 6 is quite simple. Don't die. You are the most important person on your team. One of the biggest mistakes I see is healers playing the front line because, yes, you're doing a lot of damage. Maybe you're playing Mantis or Invisible Woman, but you're also going to get picked a lot easier. Like, they're going to notice you and pull you away. If you get Bucky gripped, well, that's over. That's GG's. Or if they find you isolated out in the corner because you're overextended, that's GG's as well. Every single death that you have is more likely that your whole team is going to get wiped. Do not get eliminated. If I see my healers getting eliminated multiple times, it means that you got to help them. So if you're DPS watching this, help your healers. If your healer keeps dying 4 or 5 or 6 times, keep asking, where are you playing? Where are you at? Oh, if they're getting dived by, let's say, Cap, Black Panther, Spider-Man, and you're not helping them, of course, then they're going to be quote-unquote overextended or isolated, and that's just a major mistake. Tip number 8, communicate the backline, because tanks can't see everything. They do not have eyes in the back of their head, and it's important that you call if you are getting dived. Just as much as we mentioned, if you're getting eliminated over and over again, at some point you gotta say, hey guys, Spider-Man's messing me up the backline. I got Spider-Man, I got Captain America, I got Black Panther, I got Magic all over here. Like, this is crazy. They're all diving. Now, they'll do one of two things. They'll either forget about you and push forward and go for an aggressive push to counter, or they'll come and save you. One of the two has to happen. You have to understand you are the furthest back, you have the all eyes unless you are forward facing. Then you need to communicate which healer's doing what, and that's where the tips kind of swap over here. Here's another one. Tip number 9, swapping strategist or a bad strategist synergizing poorly with another. We kind of mentioned this where, let's say you have no burst healing. Let's say you just have a Mantis and Rocket, or Mantis and Invisible Woman. Let's say you have 2 healers that just aren't really working together. Let's say you have Luna and Cloak and Dagger. That's a very strong combo, but at the end of the day, maybe they're not able to dish out as much damage, and you switch it up and maybe buff your DPS. Maybe you're going to use Mantis to buff somebody. Maybe you're going to switch it up and have Rocket boost up Punisher instead. That could be more effective. Or Rocket could be more effective in getting the B-res out on the first point and objective, so the run back isn't as bad. And trust me, that could be pretty game changing. So if you feel like something isn't working, and let's say, for example, you are getting dived and you want to run, let's say, Mantis or Cloak and Dagger to stop them from diving, that can be a really strong decision as well. So make good, solid, informed decisions to help out with the overall counter of what's going on. If you know their dive, Cloak and Dagger is going to be pretty strong. If you know that you need to have more sustained healing and just buff whenever you got big moments, Rocket, right? That's what we're getting at here. So tip number 10, heal the DPS and overall just priority. Who's getting focused? I think one of the biggest things is that sometimes you may notice that somebody is absolutely popping off, and maybe they're playing aggressive, but you're not healing them when they need it. Let's say, for example, Iron Man is doing a great job flying into the air, but then nobody's giving the poor Iron Man any heals. And maybe your tanks are kind of struggling, but at the same time, you know, if Iron Man were able to survive just a bit longer, that would make a big difference. Ask yourself, who is the biggest problem? Let's say, for example, I don't know, Squirrel Girl's all the way in the back of the opposite line causing a lot of problems, right? If she's causing a lot of problems, then your first instinct should be, well, I'm gonna, as Luna, put my, you know, let's highlight that person who's going to go dive. That would be probably the smarter thing. Let me not put it on the tanks. So I guess the biggest tip here, just don't heal the tanks. Have different priority and understand what the bigger threat is here. Some bonus tips as we wrap up. Sound and crosshair placement. Listen for things. You can also make sure that your crosshairs are always at eye level, that you're not looking at the ground. That's a very simple one. I notice a lot of people still make the mistake of looking down at the ground. Now, you could do that. You could have Rocket point his heel towards the ground, an Invisible Woman, if you want to, you know, hit multiple people or hit it at the angle or bounce it off the wall a little sooner. That's a tactic, but just keep general awareness, because you are literally eyes and ears of the team. And it doesn't mean that you have to communicate, it just means that you have control over the situation. And if you get eliminated, I promise you, your other healer is going to go down as well and have a lot of pressure on them, and that's pretty much the game. So I hope these strategist tips, while some of them were a bit more advanced, some of them are pretty basic, but I think this list of tips is what I would provide to anybody trying to rank up on Marvel Rivals. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.